Nobody warned you about this. Nobody sat you down when you were young and told you that one day the people you respect the most, the ones who seemed most solid, most grounded, most genuinely present in your life, would simply vanish. Not dramatically, not with a fight or a confrontation or a tearful farewell that gives you something to hold on to, something to process, something to point at, and say that is where it ended, and here is why. No, they would just be there one day and gone the next. The phone that used to ring stops ringing. The messages that used to arrive stop arriving. The presence that used to fill a specific space in your world quietly withdraws from that space and leaves behind nothing but the shape of where it used to be. And you are left standing in that empty space, confused, maybe hurt, maybe angry, asking the question that everyone who has ever been left by a wise person eventually asks. Why did they not say goodbye? Why did they not explain? Why did they not give me the closure that I needed, the conversation that I deserved, the final exchange that would have made the ending make sense? And the answer to that question, the real answer, the one that most people never arrive at, because arriving at it requires a level of self-honesty that most people are not prepared for, is this. They did not say goodbye because goodbye was not for them. Goodbye is a ritual of the person who is staying. It is a gift that the lever gives to the left. And the wisest people, the ones who have done the deepest inner work, the ones who understand the nature of attachment and identity and the flow of human connection at a level that most people never reach, these people understand something about goodbye that makes the ritual unnecessary for them and often harmful for both parties. They understand that the goodbye conversation is almost never about closure. It is about reopening, about renegotiating, about one last attempt to change the mind of the person who has already decided, about the emotional leverage of a final appeal that uses the weight of shared history to prevent a departure that has already internally occurred. And the wise person who has already done the leaving in their heart, who has already processed the grief and the loss and the necessity of the departure in the quiet privacy of their own inner world, does not need this conversation, does not want it, not because they do not care, but because they care too much. Too much about the clarity they have fought to achieve, too much about the peace they have built through painful self-examination, too much about the other person's right to eventually find their own understanding of what happened without having it pre-packaged in a farewell speech that would inevitably be incomplete, inevitably be misunderstood, and inevitably become the thing that the other person argues against in their own mind for months or years, instead of doing the genuine inner work of understanding the departure on their own terms. Let me take you into the psychology of why wise people leave the way they do, because this is not cruelty disguised as wisdom. It is not cowardice dressed up as philosophy. It is the practical, lived, deeply felt consequence of a specific understanding of human nature and human relationships that the greatest thinkers in human history have articulated, and that ordinary experience confirms again and again for anyone who is paying attention. The understanding is this: most relationships are not ended by a single event. They are ended by an accumulation, a slow, gradual, often imperceptible accumulation of moments in which the relationship failed to meet one or both parties where they actually were. Moments in which something essential was asked for and not given. Moments in which something important was expressed and not heard. Moments in which the gap between who you are becoming and who the other person needs you to remain became slightly wider. And the wise person, because they are paying attention, because they have cultivated the habit of genuine self-examination that the Stoics prescribed, notices this accumulation long before it reaches the point of crisis. They notice the first widening of the gap. They feel the first subtle shift in the energy of the connection. They detect the first signs that the relationship is moving from nourishment to maintenance, from genuine mutual growth to the increasingly effortful performance of a dynamic that has outlived its natural lifespan. And they sit with this detection. They do not react to it. They do not immediately announce it. They hold it. They examine it. They test it against time, against changing circumstances, against the genuine question of whether what they are feeling is a temporary fluctuation or a permanent shift. And this examination, this patient, honest, deeply personal process of evaluating the trajectory of a relationship against the trajectory of their own growth, takes time, weeks, sometimes months, sometimes years. And during this time, the wise person is already leaving. Not physically, not visibly, but internally. In the quiet recesses of their own consciousness, they are already processing the departure, already grieving the loss, already making peace with the necessity of the separation, already building the internal architecture that will support their life after the relationship has ended. And by the time the physical departure occurs, by the time the phone stops ringing and the messages stop arriving and the presence withdraws from the space it used to occupy, the wise person has already been gone for a long time. The physical departure is just the external confirmation of an internal reality that was established quietly, privately, and long before anyone else could see it. Seneca understood this process at a level that very few people, even very few philosophers, have matched. He wrote extensively about the art of letting go, about the discipline of releasing attachments that no longer serve your genuine development, about the courage required to walk away from situations and relationships that the world expects you to maintain, but that your own inner truth tells you have run their course. And he was very clear that this process, this deliberate, considered, genuinely wise process of letting go, is not the same thing as abandonment. It is not the callous disregard of another person's feelings. It is not the selfish pursuit of your own comfort at someone else's expense. It is the honest, sometimes painful, always demanding practice of aligning your external life with your internal truth, of refusing to continue performing a role that your genuine self has outgrown, of choosing authenticity over obligation, growth over stagnation, the pain of departure over the death of remaining somewhere you no longer belong. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality," and this insight applies directly to the question of why wise people do not say goodbye. Because the goodbye conversation, the closure conversation, the final exchange that the person being left feels they need is almost always more painful than the departure itself. It reopens wounds that were beginning to heal. It reactivates emotions that were beginning to settle. It creates new material for suffering, new things said in the heat of the moment that cannot be unsaid, new misunderstandings generated by the impossible task of compressing the full complexity of a departure into a single conversation. The wise person who leaves without saying goodbye is not avoiding pain. They are preventing the creation of additional, unnecessary pain, not just for themselves, but for the person they are leaving, because they understand that the cleanest wound heals fastest. That the departure without drama is the departure that allows both parties to begin the genuine work of processing and growth most quickly. That the absence of goodbye, while initially more confusing and more painful than a goodbye would have been, ultimately produces a cleaner, more complete, more genuinely transformative separation than any conversation could. Marcus Aurelius practiced this kind of deliberate, considered, deeply private departure throughout his life. Not from relationships specifically, though he certainly experienced the loss of people he loved and the necessity of distancing himself from people who were harmful to his development, but from states of mind, from habits of thought, from ways of being that he recognized through his daily practice of self-examination as no longer serving his genuine growth. He did not announce these departures. He did not write public declarations of his intention to change. He simply, quietly in the privacy of his own practice, let go and moved on, and became, through the accumulated effect of 1,000 quiet departures from 1,000 outgrown patterns, the person who his meditations reveal him to be. A person of extraordinary depth and genuine wisdom, built not through dramatic transformations but through the patient, persistent, quietly revolutionary practice of recognizing what no longer serves and releasing it without fanfare. He wrote, "Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight." And this sentence, which sounds like simple philosophical observation, is actually a profound statement of the principle that underlies the wise person's departure. Loss is change. Change is growth. Growth is the purpose of life. And the person who clings to what is being lost, who demands goodbye as a way of postponing the change, who uses the ritual of farewell as a mechanism for delaying the growth that the departure is designed to produce, is working against the deepest current of their own nature. The wise person does not work against this current. They work with it. They let go when letting go is what growth requires. They depart when departure is what their genuine development demands. And they do so without the drama, the negotiation, the emotional theater of goodbye, because all of that theater is, at its core, resistance to the very change that their soul is asking for. Now I want to explore something that I think is one of the most important and most overlooked dimensions of this entire topic. The question of why the disappearance hurts so much. Why the absence of goodbye feels like such a profound violation. Why the quiet departure of a wise person produces a specific kind of pain that is different from, and in many ways deeper than, the pain of a dramatic, confrontational ending. Because understanding this pain, understanding where it comes from and what it is trying to teach you, is the key to transforming the experience of being left into one of the most powerful catalysts for personal growth that you will ever encounter. The pain of the quiet departure is not primarily the pain of loss. It is the pain of unfinished narrative. Human beings are narrative creatures. We understand our lives through stories. We make sense of our experiences by organizing them into coherent sequences with beginnings, middles, and ends. And when a relationship ends without a goodbye, without a final conversation, without the ritualized closing of the narrative chapter that the goodbye represents, the narrative remains unfinished, open, unresolved. And an unresolved narrative creates a specific kind of psychological distress that is far more persistent and far more consuming than the distress of a resolved one. Because the resolved narrative, however painful its conclusion, allows the mind to process the experience and move on. The story has an ending. The chapter is closed. The mind can file it away and redirect its resources toward the present and the future. But the unresolved narrative demands continuous attention. The mind keeps returning to it, keeps trying to complete it, keeps generating possible endings, possible explanations, possible reasons for the departure that might give the story the closure it needs. And this continuous return, this obsessive, energy-consuming, sleep-disrupting cycle of attempted narrative completion, is the specific mechanism by which the quiet departure produces its characteristic pain, not the loss itself, but the unfinished story of the loss. And here is where the teaching lies. Because the wise person who departed without saying goodbye did not leave the narrative unfinished by accident. They left it unfinished deliberately, not to cause you pain, but to give you something far more valuable than closure. They gave you an invitation to do the work that no goodbye conversation could do for you, the work of finding your own closure, the work of writing your own ending, the work of making sense of the departure through your own genuine self-examination rather than through the pre-packaged explanation that a goodbye would have provided. Because the closure that comes from outside, the closure that is given to you by the departing person in the form of an explanation or a farewell, is always someone else's closure. It is their version of why the relationship ended, their interpretation of what went wrong, their narrative of the story that includes you but that is, ultimately, theirs. And this external closure, however satisfying it might feel in the moment, actually prevents you from developing your own understanding. It gives you a ready-made narrative that you can either accept or reject, but that, either way, dominates your processing of the event and prevents you from doing the deeper, more honest, more genuinely transformative work of arriving at your own understanding. The wise person who leaves without goodbye is, in a sense, refusing to do your homework for you, refusing to give you the answer sheet, refusing to provide the easy resolution that would spare you the effort of genuine self-examination. They are leaving you with the raw material of the experience and trusting you, respecting you enough to trust you to do your own processing, to find your own meaning, to write your own ending. And this trust, this respect, this gift of unresolved space in which your own growth can occur, is one of the most generous and most misunderstood acts that one human being can perform for another. Epictetus would have understood this perfectly. His entire philosophy was built on the principle that genuine growth requires genuine effort. That understanding cannot be given to you. It must be earned. That the most valuable insights are the ones you arrive at through your own struggle, rather than the ones that are handed to you by someone else. He said, "It is impossible for a person to learn what they think they already know." And a goodbye conversation, a farewell explanation, a closing narrative provided by the departing person gives you the illusion of already knowing. It gives you a story that feels like understanding, that feels like closure, that feels like the final piece of the puzzle that allows you to put the whole thing to rest. But it is not genuine understanding. It is someone else's understanding. And the person who accepts someone else's understanding as their own has not learned anything. They have consumed an explanation, which is very different from arriving at one. And the wise person, who understands this difference at a visceral level, who has learned through their own experience that the most valuable knowledge is always the knowledge you generate yourself, refuses to deprive you of the opportunity to generate your own understanding by giving you theirs. Let me talk about something that connects this entire discussion to a broader pattern in the lives of wise people. A pattern that extends far beyond the specific question of why they leave without saying goodbye. The pattern is withdrawal, periodic, deliberate, often misunderstood withdrawal from the social world into the private world of genuine self-examination and renewed inner development. The wise person does not just withdraw from specific relationships. They withdraw, periodically, from the entire social matrix, from the network of expectations and obligations and performances that constitute ordinary social life. They do this not because they are antisocial, not because they do not value human connection, but because they understand something that most people never learn, that genuine connection requires genuine selfhood, and genuine selfhood requires periodic solitude. You cannot be genuinely present with another person if you have lost contact with yourself. You cannot offer genuine intimacy if you do not know who you are. You cannot contribute genuinely to a relationship if your sense of self has been dissolved in the constant flow of social interaction and social expectation. And so the wise person withdraws periodically, deliberately, without announcement and without explanation. They disappear for a while, they go quiet, they become unreachable. And during this period of withdrawal, they do the work that cannot be done in the company of others. The work of honest self-examination, the work of processing accumulated experience, the work of integrating new understanding into the existing framework of their self-knowledge, the work of growing. And when they return, if they return as a more complete, more genuine, more deeply grounded version of themselves. A version that can offer more to the people in their life precisely because it has spent time alone with itself. A version that is more present, more attentive, more genuinely available precisely because it has been genuinely unavailable for a period of necessary self-renewal. Seneca described this practice with beautiful clarity. He wrote about the importance of withdrawing into yourself as a regular practice of philosophical hygiene, not as an escape from the world, but as a necessary maintenance of the inner resources that genuine engagement with the world requires. He compared it to the practice of sharpening a blade. The blade that is used constantly without being sharpened becomes dull, it loses its edge, its cuts become ragged and imprecise, it requires more force to achieve less effect. But the blade that is periodically withdrawn from use and carefully sharpened returns to its work with renewed precision, renewed effectiveness, renewed capacity to do what it was designed to do. The wise person's periodic withdrawal from social life is this sharpening, this renewal, this maintenance of the inner edge that genuine presence and genuine connection require. Without it, the wise person becomes dull, their interactions become routine, their presence becomes automatic rather than genuine, their relationships become performances of connection rather than genuine expressions of it. And rather than allow this dulling to continue, rather than allow their absence to degrade into what the wise person withdraws, sharpens, renews, and returns when they are ready with an edge that cuts clean. Now I want to address something directly, because I know that many people hearing this are not thinking about the wise person who left them. They are thinking about whether they are the wise person who needs to leave. Whether the restlessness they have been feeling, the sense of having outgrown certain relationships, the growing distance between who they are becoming and who the people around them need them to remain, is not a problem to be solved but a signal to be honored. And this is a deeply personal and deeply important question that deserves to be answered with honesty and with care. If you are feeling the pull to disappear, the pull to withdraw, the pull to walk away from certain relationships or certain environments without the drama of explanation and farewell, the first thing you need to do is examine the pull honestly, because not every desire to withdraw is wise. Sometimes the desire to disappear is not a sign of growth but a sign of avoidance, not a sign of having outgrown a situation, but a sign of being afraid to face the difficulty that the situation presents. Not a sign of wisdom, but a sign of the specific form of cowardice that disguises itself as self-sufficiency. And the way to distinguish between genuine wisdom and disguised cowardice is this: the wise departure is preceded by genuine inner work, by honest self-examination, by the patient, thorough, deeply personal process of understanding why the relationship or the situation no longer serves your genuine development, by the genuine grief of accepting that something you valued has run its course, by the hard, uncomfortable work of separating your genuine needs from your ego's preferences. The cowardly departure skips all of this. It is reactive rather than reflective. It is driven by discomfort rather than understanding. It seeks to escape difficulty rather than to honor the completion of a genuine chapter. It leaves behind not the clean wound of a considered departure, but the ragged tear of an unconsidered flight. If you have done the work, if you have examined your motives honestly, if you have sat with the decision long enough to be confident that it comes from genuine understanding rather than temporary discomfort, if you have grieved what needs to be grieved and accepted what needs to be accepted and made peace with what needs to be made peace with, then trust yourself. Trust the clarity that your inner work has produced. Trust the quiet certainty that arises not from impulse but from deep, sustained, genuinely honest self-examination, and go quietly, without drama, without the farewell conversation that would reopen everything you have worked so hard to close, without the explanation that would reduce the complex, deeply personal, genuinely transformative process of your departure to a set of talking points that the other person would argue against rather than learn from. Go. And trust that the people you leave behind are capable of finding their own understanding, their own closure, their own growth, in their own time, through their own effort, just as you found yours. The wisest people disappear without saying goodbye because they understand that the deepest goodbyes are the ones that are never spoken, the ones that are lived, the ones that are expressed not through words but through the quiet, dignified, profoundly respectful act of letting someone go without burdening them with your reasons, of trusting them to find their own way, of honoring their capacity for growth by refusing to do their growing for them, of loving them enough to leave them in the silence where their own wisdom can begin to speak. If this shifted something in you, if it reframed something you experienced as painful into something you can now see as purposeful, then you understand what this channel is about. We are not here for comfort, we are here for clarity. Subscribe, because every conversation we have takes you deeper into the kind of understanding that the noise of modern life is designed to prevent. I will see you in the next one.